Hey, Dean, welcome. Welcome to the ABM Voice podcast. Great to have you here. How's it going?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Ron. Nice to be here and talk a little bit more about ABM.
Absolutely. Common interest. Let's just start by having you do a quick introduction of yourself, right? So the kind of work that you do, the organization and things like that.
Yeah, of course. So my name is Dean. I'm in account-based marketing strategist role, and I work for a company called xGrowth. And so in my role, I work with a lot of B2B SaaS, particularly helping them with ABM campaigns. So we do specialize predominantly in the APAC market, so helping teams scale out into the region, particularly on startups. And we help from really fundamentals in terms of, strategy and like how do you select your accounts and what does success look like? How do you create a campaign journey map, all the way through to, putting messaging together, creating assets, all of those kind of things. We're very much an end-to-end agency.
Awesome. So talking about APAC, and I think maybe even more specifically the Australian New Zealand region, right? So what's the state of ABM in terms of maturity, the adoption, the awareness, and that kind of thing? In terms of the ABM program and willingness to try something new.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So what I would say is, if you're comparing the ANZ market and the US market, there's a very big kind of difference there in terms of like technology maturity and things like that. From our perspective, what we see is typically there's not as many resources in ANZ. So maybe there's a head of marketing or a marketing manager that's kind of leading the way. And so ABM is like one of many things that they manage. And so the big kind of difference there is they have a few different hats. And so they're often starting out with ABM. Maybe they're a bit unaware of how to track things or how to actually get a campaign off the ground. And so they're still in that early stage of adoption. What I would say also is it's pretty well known, like what ABM is, but people actually kind of taking action on it is quite small. So it's something a lot of new organizations we work with are taking it on, every, few weeks, and we're talking to new people. So it's a gradual process, and they're definitely kind of getting there.
Are there any specific industries who are sort of leading, like tech, SaaS, these sort of companies compared to traditional industries who are willing to try out new things like ABM, for example?
I'd say from an ABM perspective, the ones that are definitely leading the way are the companies that have very, very high sales. So, your companies like Oracle, your Salesforce, things like that, just because they have really, really big accounts that are spending millions, if not hundreds of millions in deals. So they're the companies that we've seen and really kind of push the boundaries from ABM. But as more of a general stance, I definitely think SaaS is probably leading the way from an ABM perspective, but also some like IT service providers are also pretty close on that trail as well.
Okay. So typically, what type of ABM engagements do you have with your clients? Like you talked about Oracle and those kind of companies, right? So I'm assuming you will do like a lot of one-to-one kind of programs compared to, let's say, a B2B SaaS company, maybe just about starting, for example, right? So so in general, like what is the mix in terms of one-to-many to one-to-few to one-to-one?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. So it really does depend on the business itself. So looking at things like the maturity of the organization, how much they sell for, what is the sales process like, what's their go-to-market strategy. Most of the companies that we deal with are probably sitting somewhere in the 10 to 200K annual contract value. And in that case, what we see typically work really well for a first ABM is focusing on that one to few stage. So you get the benefits of having a slightly wider account list than you would from a one-to-one, but you also do get that level of personalization that you might not get from a programmatic. And so what's also been really good in that is if you do a one-to-few campaign, it's a great way to build a relationship with sales and learn a little bit more about how they work and go from there. And then that's when you can start thinking about how do we have an always on programmatic campaign? How do we scale accounts up into a one-to-one? And it gives you a few more options rather than kind of going maybe on a programmatic to begin with.
Got it. So as an ABM strategist yourself, right? So let's say there is a startup which is like sort of wanting to implement ABM. First of all, what sort of maturity would you expect from those sort of companies to like get started with ABM, first of all? And what is the process that you generally advise in terms of getting started, like designing, scaling, and starting to really scale for itself?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. What I would say is a lot of the content and everything you see online, it's very much showing you this perfect picture of ABM. So you've got this company that knows it all, has it all planned out. It's this perfect moving system. And what I would say is don't get too caught up in looking at that. What I would do in my experience, looking at it from a startup perspective, is how can we just get something up and going? So maybe have a chat to the sales team or have a look at your current customer list and see if you can see if there's any themes there across those customers. And then you can do something as simple as working with a sales team, putting a list together and just doing a really simple campaign, maybe some outreach or some advertising or an event, and just keep it super simple. And then each campaign just kind of build on top of that. We don't need to boil the ocean in the one go. And so, that's my approach. I think, start scrappy, start small. You don't need a big budget. And then once you do have those foundations really locked in and good to go, that's when you can explore like bringing in tools or bringing in external resources or kind of going a little bit further. But to begin with, I think keep it nice and simple.
Are there any like minimum size that you recommend in terms of the target account size list?
Well, I would say if you're beginning, you probably want to stay somewhere in the 20 to 100 account range. I think just to begin with. Any less than that, and you don't have wide enough scope to maybe see some results quite early on. And if you go any further than that, then it's a very like low touch campaign. So somewhere in there is probably a really good starting point.
Sure. So what would be the dipstick? So you started with, let's say, 50 accounts, right? And you're doing this scrappy way of getting started with ABM. What are the, let's say, the indicators that they should look for, right? So to assess whether or not this investment is actually going towards where they would like to go, and what are the corrective actions that they have to do, right? So what would be those touch points or interventions that you need to do to really figure out like whether things are going in the right direction?
Yeah, I think very much the foundations of ABM is looking at the 3 R's. So reputation, relationships, and revenue. And so when putting a campaign together, I think it's really good to kind of have a look at the accounts and make some kind of tangible numbers in terms of what you're looking to see. So whether you're having a certain percentage of accounts engage with you on your online advertising, maybe a percentage of the accounts booking meetings and speaking with the sales team, and then even another smaller number of accounts are transitioning to an opportunity. And so if you're running that over a period, then you can look back and be like, are we getting some results? Are we heading the right way? So it's really good to look at those things. But it's also good to speak to sales and say, are you enjoying this the conversations you're having good. And so you've got that qualitative and quantitative approach, and you're kind of going off both as you continue to develop.
Okay. So sticking to the early stage B2B companies, right? So let's say that there's something that's working for them, traditional lead gen sort of programs that they are running. They wanted to get into ABM. How do you advise them to connect these two programs, right? And then it's not like very tightly integrated, but like, how do you connect these two funnels?
Yeah, that's another common question we do see, because a lot of people coming to us with a really strong, demand gen approach, and they're wondering, like, how do I do both? Do I drop one? Do I and how do I navigate that? What I would say is they can definitely live in tandem. So it's good to have that, lead gen, demand gen approach as more of a broader for your entire total addressable market. And then what we can do is, through analysis of like looking at customers and how much revenue they bring in, what you can do is segment that into smaller groups and try and build it off the back of that. So, you have this base layer of the lead gen model, whether it's, SEO, your advertising, your webinars, whatever, and then having that ABM sit on top of that. So whether an example of this might be you're running a 1 to few campaign, you have an event, but you really want these top 50 accounts to attend. Potentially you might have a heightened level of advertising, you might have a direct mail piece, you might actually have some outreach directing people to that event. So there's a few ways you can look at it, but I think definitely keeping in mind and making sure that they're both kind of churning along. I think that's a really good way to start.
So it seems that you're like larger, one to many programs feeding into the one to few periodically based on engagements that they're showing, and then you get them into very tighter focused marketing to this one to few programs. Is that how it is being done, or you're advising?
Yeah. So that would be, I'd say that's like the ideal next step. So, first you have your traditional lead gen, demand gen approach that's happening. And then what you would do is, in my recommendation, try a 1 to few campaign, try and build that relationship with sales, generate some results and really get their buy-in. And then once you've got that really locked in, that's when you can explore that programmatic side of things, and having an always on campaign of looking at accounts that are either a really good ICP fit, or on the other side of things, there's maybe some level of intent data, whether that's like first or third party, and having that as like this always on engine that flags accounts to the sales reps, and then they can go from there and be like, oh, okay, Commonwealth Bank, we're getting some really good engagement here. That indicates to me that we need to, be a bit more personalized to them, and maybe do, a 1 to few or 1 to 1 approach, depending on what makes most sense for your business.
Okay. So would you want those accounts which are engaged, right? So through some marketing interventions and then hand it over to sales, or is it the other way around typically? How's your approach?
So always typically from a base level, it's very much marketing led. And then what we would typically do is we'd have some level of sales development in there as well. So that would be helping on the actually reaching out to accounts and booking in conversations. And then once we've generated that interest, that's when we want to start transitioning that conversation over to the account executive.
Dean, I just want to switch gears and talk a little bit about the enterprise engagement models, right? So for example, you guys work with a lot of this large companies, right? So typically these are global conglomerates, and it would seem that they would have an ongoing global program, right? So how do you take that and customize for the local needs? Right? Do you have any experience on those lines? And if so, what is the process that you guys adopt?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. So with some of the larger companies that we deal with, what we see is that the head office will often manage more of the programmatic side of things. So that will be more the wide scale targeting key accounts. I think where regionally we would come in is around defining what accounts that we want to target. So helping provide lists of them and insights on where we're winning and where we want to target. And then from a local perspective, what we would do is run more of those one-to-few and one-to-one campaigns. And so the reason that is because APAC is a very complex market in terms of there's a lot of different geographies, different cultures, different languages. And so having that ability to slightly tinker approaches and make sure that it makes sense in that context is really important. So for example, if you were doing some kind of SDR outreach, what you would say to someone running an organization in Japan would be extremely different than what you would see reaching out to someone in Australia. So they're probably the biggest things. And I also notice that the head office often does a lot of work from on the data side of things. So, making sure that integrations into Salesforce or other tool like ABM platforms and other tools, and just making sure that they're all cohesive. The sales reps and the marketing teams are getting the information they need to make sure that they are being fast in getting those approaches up and going.
Right. Good. Makes sense. The larger organization, right? Especially the big enterprises, right? Typical problem that you would I'm sure that you're coming across is that sales and marketing are working in silos, right? So there is not too much of alignment. When you take that sort of a situation and then wanting to do something like an ABM, which requires a lot of collaboration between those two functions, right? So oftentimes it's very challenging, right? How do you overcome? So what are the, let's say, methodologies or some ideas that you guys implement that could be used by others?
Yeah, that's. I think that's probably one of the biggest things that we see, and it's something that we're quite strong in. And I think to build a strong ABM foundation within your company, sales and marketing alignment is probably the number one factor. If you have someone on the sales team that won't give you any time, won't give you any effort, and you can't build that relationship, it becomes extremely difficult. And what I would say in terms of really breaking down those silos is just making sure that you speak the language of sales. So one of the big things that we see is sales don't really care about how many impressions or clicks there are. That's not really anything that they care about. And so we need to make sure that we're talking about things that they care about. So whether it's the accounts getting exposed to information that we want them to consume, are we having meetings in those accounts and building those relationships? Are we generating opportunities? Are they attending events? Those kind of things that give them more opportunities to build relationships with, especially those really top key accounts. That is the foundation of what we're trying to do. So definitely shifting how you would track a campaign and speaking more into the language of a salesperson.
Right. So these conversations, do you have directly, do you sort of mediate between these two functions, right? When you're working with larger organizations, or you enable the marketing teams to go and then build those relationships?
So what we typically do is we're very much in that conversation as well. So we'll help bring them together. We'll help identify who they should be speaking with, and as well as guiding those conversations. So it's very much a collaborative approach between us as an external party and the marketing team, and making sure that we're giving the marketing team everything that they need to kind of handle those conversations the right way and build those relationships correctly.
Okay. Again, different line of question. So let's say you have this handful of accounts that you wanted to want to few, maybe just like trickle down from your demand gen, right? So you have this, let's say 10 accounts, 20 accounts that you now pulled into one campaign, right? So what are the different activations or touch points that you would have depending on how these accounts are progressing, right? So what channels would you like leverage, right? What kind of content, right? So how do you progress these accounts with once you're trying to do a very focused one to few kind of a program for this 20-hour account that I just took it as an example?
Yeah, so I think it can vary quite a lot. Like, so what a company like Zoom would look at from like a one to few is quite different than an Oracle one to few. But I think from a broad scope, from a metric, from a tactics side of things, what we see quite well is specific advertising or events, maybe an outreach piece. So we're actually engaging with them on a one-to-one level. There could be direct mail pieces involved there as well. And then even things like putting together custom content too. So that could be looking at industry content that's relevant to all of the accounts. Could be pain point or technology based content. Whatever the kind of grouping, whatever was used to group the accounts, that's kind of what we would build the content of. And so that way that what they're reading is extremely relevant to the account.
Okay. I just wanted to, what kind of message typically goes as part of the direct mail outreach? Is it like more gifting sort of thing, or is it like sending some thought leadership articles or books or anything like that? Like how are you leveraging that channel?
So what we do internally is we create a value proposition for that specific cluster of accounts. And then based on that cluster, we do something called creating a campaign theme. And so that's just like a creative kind of storytelling way to maybe better tell a story rather than going, oh, hey, we're Zoom, we're so great, we're the best. Speaking more into the customer's problems. So, it could be something very simple like just like one little bit of information or like one piece of content we've printed and send it to them. But it also can get quite complicated. Like, for example, we did like a backup kit for a cybersecurity company, and I had a heap of different little camping goods, a Swiss Army knife, some customized content, and basically everything that you would need if there was like a catastrophic event that occurred. So there's a lot of different ways to do it. I think what we've seen is the really bespoke direct mail pieces that have yielded the best results.
Okay. So how do you measure the effectiveness of that? Do they come back and then provide information, or do you follow up with some kind of a phone call or something like that? Or how do you know that this thing that you've done through this direct mail is sort of a touch point, right? How does it lead to something of value?
Yeah. And so typically the direct mail would be one part of an entire sequence. And so through that process, whether it's the account executive or the BDR, they'll be engaging with that person reaching out. And so through that process, they're usually like, oh, thank you so much, Arun, for sending me this package. I'd love to have a chat and learn a little bit more. And then that's kind of going into those sales metrics that we spoke about earlier.
Okay, makes sense. I just wanted to just go to the next question, which is around attribution, which relates to the previous question, right? So when you do multiple things, right, especially when you're doing a one type of an ABM campaign, right, so multiple disconnected channels sometimes, like direct mail, that you would basically have to leverage, right, which essentially means that there are like you're creating a lot of this data silos, right? Is that a problem for you currently, or if not, how have you overcome, right? Because these channels, right? So not everybody or all channels allow you to integrate and have the single sort of a view, right? So there are typically, invariably, if you're running a large program, right? So there is data sitting in systems, there is CRM, automation, those things can be obviously connected. But let's say things like direct mail or an event that you've run and things like that, right? So how do you manage the data silos, and how do you make sure that it's not affecting your attribution?
Yes, it is a tricky one. I think it very much comes back to how mature you are as an organization in more of a general sense, as well as ABM. So, what are you looking? What does your backup system look like? How are you actually pulling that data in and making sense of it? For many startup organizations, most of the time it's often very hard to do something like that. And so what you probably need to go off is more qualitative data, whether you're getting some positive messages from a direct mail perspective. Maybe they might share it on social media, for example. Things like that can really give you an indication of whether it's working. But sometimes in the early days, you might need to go just off a general kind of feel based on the feedback the sales reps received, maybe the SDR, and things like that. And then once you kind of build that trust within the organization and then they're aware that it works, that's when you can look into using different platforms or tools or, gifting platforms that have a little bit more of a tracking element to it. And that way you can have a more holistic view of the customer.
Okay. Sticking to the challenges, right? So unlike, let's say, companies having their own marketing functions and then managing the entire processes, right? So for agencies, they service different type of customers, different stages of maturity, different tools, different processes, right? As an agency, right? So how do you sort of manage the problem? Do you sort of like look for that specific tool that basically makes it easy for you to manage regardless of what the kind of customers or clients that you're using? And if so, what would be an ideal tool look like for you?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think it would be awesome if everyone used the same things and it was all super easy and sweet and you just jumped in and you knew exactly what was happening. From our perspective, just because there is that variance in the market, we have to be very agnostic in terms of our recommendations, what our clients use, and just making sure that we're well versed over everything and we can make sure that we are delivering the best experience for our clients. From a tool perspective, like it would be great if there was. I think obviously one of the biggest barriers is just the cost, especially for someone starting out on their ABM journey. And if they haven't done any ABM before, is it worth spending $50,000 on an ABM tool? Probably not, I would say. I would probably spend more time building that foundation and the sales and marketing alignment that we discussed earlier. And then once you do have buy-in, everyone's like, how can we do this ABM stuff more and faster? That's when you start looking at, those tools that you can do broad scale, IP targeted, look at intent, things like that. But from a foundation perspective, very much around just getting things up and running and getting some quick wins.
Dean, I think this has been a great discussion. So although we have had some interruptions in between, this has been great. Thank you for sharing your insights, thoughts. Right, I really enjoyed talking to you. And if there was any final thought that you wanted to just put it across, please go ahead. And also, like, if people wanted to reach out to you, what's the best channel, best way to get in touch with you?
Yeah, really appreciate the time, Aaron. It was a good session. We touched on a lot in this short period. I think what our biggest takeaway is, ABM doesn't have to be big and scary. Start simple, start small, and really play that long game. I think that's the most important side of things. And then if anyone wants to connect with me, I'm on LinkedIn, Dean McGuinness. And yeah, that's the best place. I post from time to time. So any questions or any thoughts, feel free to send me a message. Thanks again.
Sure, we'll make sure that we link it in the show description. But Dean, thanks again. Thanks so much.